Hey guys, today we're working on a Kohler XT6.75 on a Yardworks self-propel lawnmower. Let's get right into it. So it's 6 3/4 horsepower, 149 cc, self-propel, Yardworks here. But this thing, guys, we had a customer drop it off yesterday. He says that the engine runs for about 20-25 minutes and then it shuts off. And he says once it shuts off, he can fire it right back up, but it ends up dying shortly after. And he says the longer he lets it sit, if he lets it after dying, if he lets it sit for about 30 minutes, he says he can fire it up and run it for another 30 minutes. So my guess is it's got a clogged vent on the gas cap, so it's not letting air inside, and it's causing a little bit of that vapor lock inside of the fuel tank, and it's not letting any more fuel into the carburetor. Unscrew that, and then there's a piece of plastic in here. You just got to rotate it to the right spot, and that just pulls out just like that. Now, I'm not sure if this one vents through the threads. Some of them vent through the threads or through a hole on the top. I'm going to remove the carburetor and put that into the ultrasonic cleaner as well. And because when it was running a little rough. So I'll fire this thing up just so you guys can hear it. Well guys, it just died out, so I took it right from here and I just popped it up over this, and I was going to start cutting some grass, and it died out. Now, it died out really slow, so there's a difference if your machine dies out quick or slow. So normally if your machine just quits out and it doesn't sputter as it's dying and it just dies abruptly, normally that's a spark issue because you're cutting off the ignition, so you're not having any more combustion inside of the cylinder. If it dies out slowly and it sputters as it dies out, and the RPM gets slower and slower, normally that's a carburetor issue, and that's exactly what happened on this machine. It started to sputter, the RPM started to lower, and then it just basically shut off. So my guess is, guys, that this is just a dirty carburetor issue, and there's nothing wrong with the actual spark or any other electronic components on this machine. Okay, so we're going to pull the airbox off. To get the outer casing off, you just depress the piece up here, and then that pulls right off. And we'll go ahead and get these, I believe they're 3/8 or 10 mil nuts off, and we can pull the airbox off. Okay, and once you got those nuts off, you can come and pop this little guy out. That's just like a velocity stack, so it creates like a little vortex inside for the air-fuel mixture. Then we're going to disconnect our crankcase vent tube from the airbox, and we should be able to pull this off. You can see there's another vent tube down there that will take off. And when you pull your air filter housing off, you want to make sure that you don't lose these little spacers under here, guys, because they will fall off. Okay, so this tube here is our crankcase breather tube, but I can see right here that this looks like it's a fuel tank breather tube. So this vents right into the airbox. So as the machine's running and there's suction here, it draws the air from the fuel tank, and that brings it right into the airbox. This could also be an issue. So on this model, it must not vent through the gas cap itself, and it could vent through this tube. So this could be just an issue of this tube clogged up. So what I'm thinking now is removing the fuel tank and then taking my compressor and blowing this line out. I'm going to have to drain the fuel anyways, because I'm not sure if it's old fuel or not. He never really said, but normally I do like to drain the tanks anyways, just so that I know that fresh fuel is going into the engine. So what we're going to do next is take some pliers, remove the fuel line. Now this doesn't have a fuel shutoff valve, so there's going to be quite a bit of fuel coming out of here. So you're going to want to get yourself a little bottle or something, and then we should be able to disconnect our linkages and just pull the carburetor right off from these studs. Now, to disconnect this throttle linkage up here that goes back to the governor, you just want to rotate it until you get this slot at the top there, and then give your linkage a little push it back and up, and it should come right out. Now to get this linkage off of here, we won't be able to do that unless we take the shroud off. So you're going to start just by taking off these 3 nuts right up there, and then this top cover should come right off. Okay, so after getting the front one and the top right one off, this one wouldn't come off, but we can see that somebody has stripped the threads on the bottom of that stud. Not really good, and that's what holds the gas tank into position. I don't know if that's red Loctite, but I think it is. So somebody must have just totally stripped that thread right out, and they just packed it full of red Loctite and screwed it back in and pretended like it never happened, eh? So what I'm going to do now is, again, remove this little guy, this little spacer right there, and I'll take a 10mm long socket, or you could use a 10mm box end wrench, and you're going to loosen that off, and we're going to get the fuel tank off, because right now that's the only thing that's holding it on. And then we can, again, take a 10mm to this. Everything's 10mm on here, guys, but we'll take a 10mm to this. We'll get these two off here, and we can then remove that with our carburetor. Okay, and once you get your 10mm nuts off of there, you can just rotate this until this piece comes off, and then now we should be able to slide our carburetor right off, disconnect the fuel line, and then have a look at this on the workbench. Okay, so because I'm using a little milk crate here, and it's got the lawnmower tipped up to the side, when I disconnected the fuel line, no fuel's coming out because, well, all the fuel's on that bottom corner. Once the fuel tank is removed, then I'll drain the fuel and make sure that it's clean. We'll flush the tank, we'll blow out that line right there, and we'll also blow out the fuel line itself, and make sure that if there's a fuel filter in there, sometimes they run like a little inline fuel filter inside of the fuel line there, or if there's a little screen inside of the fuel tank at the bottom there, we'll make sure that's all clean. Next thing we're going to do, most likely, is I'll drain the oil, because it does have way too much oil in it. And we're in the garage now because my neighbor was planing some wood and just cutting some wood on like a table saw, and it was kind of noisy, so I brought the machine in here. This mower takes 20 ounces of oil, but this machine had a little bit more oil than it was supposed to. It was over the full line, but what I might do is just drain a little bit of oil out of it. But as you guys can see, the carb just slides off right like that, and we'll definitely tear this thing apart and get it all cleaned up, and make sure that none of the jets are plugged. Then they got a big piece of gasket material here, and then here's this plastic spacer that I was telling you guys about. On these Kohlers, you guys can see just how far away this airbox is away from the actual engine, and right in here, guys, you can see this piece of plastic brings your carburetor farther out from the engine, and what that does is it makes it so that your carburetor doesn't heat up as fast, because if this carburetor was bolted directly to the engine, what would happen is your fuel would vaporize inside of the carburetor before getting into the cylinder, just from the sheer amount of heat. So they run these plastic spacers to bring that carburetor farther out so that the carburetor doesn't get as hot. And then we have another gasket here, which I'm going to leave that. And you guys can see on this carburetor here, underneath your throttle backstop, so that's where you would set your idle. You have to unscrew that to get that little plug out. See that little plug underneath there? So we're going to take that out, and we're going to, this thing here, that just pops right out. You might be able to get like a little flathead in there, standard screwdriver, and just pry that up. But that should pop right out. And then we'll go under here, remove that, and pull the bowl off of here, and take a look at the inside of this carburetor, see how dirty it is. And to remove that, you guys can see I have a little wooden vise here. I use that for tightening and loosening these sediment bowl bolts, because sometimes they get gunk build up around them, and they're quite hard to get off just by holding it with your hand. And you don't want to put this into an actual vise where the jaws have you know, the bevels and all sorts of rough edges to them. So I use the wood vise here, and that's just your average woodworking vise, but what it allows me to do is clamp the carburetor in there, and once again, it's just a 10 mil, and you get some nice leverage on it, and that'll come right off, and then you can loosen that right out, and there's no damage to the carburetor. Okay, so having a look at the sediment bowl, you guys can see there's a little bit of rust in there, and a little bit of nasty stuff, but not that much. The carburetor, on the other hand, it apart from a little bit of rust here and there, it doesn't look that bad. We'll get that off. We'll pull out that gasket. We'll have a look, guys. And again, to get this off, you just want to pull out the little rod here and just lift that straight out. And again, that little guy just clips in to the back of the float. Now there's a little spring on there. You guys can see that, so just be careful when you're pulling that off. Okay, so now that the float's off, we can have a look here. And we do have some rust starting, especially at the back, well, especially back there. And that hole as well looks fairly clean, but what I'm going to do, guys, now is take a small standard screwdriver that's just a regular flathead. You can see there's a big chunk of something in there, and that definitely looks like rust. And we're going to take that jet and we're just going to unscrew it. So that's threaded, see that? And it's threaded all the way down. So again, I'm going to clean up that little piece of rust there, and then take a screwdriver and unthread that jet just so we can get it out and on the workbench. And then again, you want to make sure that you get any jets out. So on some of these carburetors, guys, like I said, you're going to have a jet here as well. But this model, it looks like it's cast all the way through, and nothing goes in there. I'm just trying to look for threads, but I don't see any. But again, if you have one, what you want to do is thread it in first and count the number of turns it took you to thread it in, and then thread it all the way out so that you can you know, blast some carb cleaner in there and get it clean. But like I said, the next step I'm going to do here is remove this, pop that little cap out, and we'll get this into the ultrasonic cleaner. Now, you guys probably don't have an ultrasonic cleaner, so you want to pick up yourself a can of carb cleaner. It blasts away all the nasty stuff in there. And what you guys want to do is, on this one, you guys can see they come with the nozzle. So you guys want to take that nozzle and you want to blast it into all these little tiny holes there, and just get your carburetor as clean as possible. It also helps to get the outside of the carburetor clean as well, so that when you're putting it back together, you don't get like a piece of dirt that falls in there, and that could ruin your day. So again, remove as much as you possibly can from the carburetor itself, and then you can go ahead and start blasting it. If you have a compressor, I also recommend taking your compressor and blasting some high pressure air through there, just in case you have something like that chunk of rust that's in there right now, and it'll blast stuff out like that pretty good. But I'm going to be using a 3-liter ultrasonic cleaner, and that'll vibrate any of the dirt and debris that's been in here and get it cleaned up. And once again, guys, once you get that off, this just pops right out, and it looks a little something like this. So it's got a big hole onto it there, and it's got a piece of brass on the bottom there. And again, if this gets clogged up, guys, you're going to be in trouble. And then take your can of carb cleaner and spray it in there as well. And if you do have a little set of oxyacetylene tip cleaners or pipe cleaners, you want to make sure that all these little holes are clean as well. And once again, I'm just using the woodworking vise back here to hold the carburetor in place so I can get a little bit of leverage. And with a screwdriver here, we're able to loosen that off. So we'll bring it over to the workbench now and pop out that main jet. And it should pop right out. So now we're left with this, guys. So something like that could have a little piece of gunk into it. And again, you want to spray this with Carb Clean. So you want to take that and put it on the end of your carburetor can nozzle there and hit that, and it should come out the other end. Now if it doesn't and it comes out the side where you put your screwdriver in there, then chances are that means that your hole there is clogged. So again, what you want to do is take a little oxyacetylene tip cleaner, something like this right here, and it's got all different size of tips onto it, and you can get the right size one and just poke it through, make sure that it's clean. So again, I'm not using that much soap, but that's really all you need is just a little bit, and I think you guys can see the steam coming off here, so it is warm. But we're just going to put the carburetor in there and lay it down like that, and then I'm going to take this whole thing and I'm just going to dump all that inside of here. You guys can see all the little bits of crud in there. That's okay. We're just going to dump it all in there. I even put the float in there. That won't hurt nothing. And then what I think I'm going to do is run this for about 15 minutes, and maybe about halfway through I'll come over here with my little scoop here, because that'll be pretty hot, and I'll flip that carburetor over and just give the water a little stir to make sure that you know, all the sediments are mixed up and it gets evenly cleaned. Okay, so I got the ultrasonic cleaner running right now, and basically after maybe I'd say about 30 seconds, you could already start to see the color of the water going from clear to like dark brown. So it definitely is getting a lot of stuff out of that carburetor, which is good, really good. So after about maybe 7 minutes, I'll go in there and flip the carb just to make sure that again, it's getting cleaned evenly, and then that should be good. But yeah, I love that cleaner. It's awesome. Instead of sitting there spraying carb cleaner, going through like $8 a can, you know, for every other machine that we do, or every 2 machines that we do, we got to get a can of carb cleaner. Now we just throw that in there, and while that's happening, I can go and like I said, remove that fuel tank, drain out the fuel. I got a little jerry can that's empty right there, and I'll drain that out, and what we'll do is flush the fuel tank with a little bit of clean fuel, make sure that there's no debris in there, and then again blow out those lines with the compressor, so that by the time the carburetor's done, I'll have that done, and we should be ready to put it back together. I also came over to the workbench here and got a well, not really clean, but it's a clean enough piece of shop towel there just to lay out my carburetor, so that I know when I reassemble it, everything's clean and free of debris. Okay, so now we got our fuel tank over here on our workbench, and here's our vent tube. Now there's still fuel in this tank here, and it's not leaking out of the fuel cap, so we know that it doesn't vent from the fuel cap. It vents from this line here. So I got a jerry can right here, and I'm just going to hold that in between my legs, and I'm going to blow on this, and we're going to hear if fuel comes out of there. And if it does, then we know that this vents as it should. And you guys could hear that air was being forced through here out of the line, and if this was tilted up like that, where fuel was, you know, at this line, that would have pushed fuel into the jerry can. So we know that this is not clogged and it works as it should. So my guess is it just needed a carburetor clean and everything should work now. However, I'm still going to drain and flush the fuel tank just to make sure that it's clean of all debris. Okay, so I've gone ahead and disconnected the fuel line at the fuel tank, and sure enough, guys, you can see that there is a fuel filter. That's an inline fuel filter that goes inside of these fuel tanks, and it just clears the debris before it gets to the line. However, there was fuel in this tank, and when I lifted it up to drain the gas from this line into my jerry can, it didn't go that fast. And I'm guessing that this fuel filter in here might be a little clogged up. So I'm going to get a pair of needle nose pliers and just try to wiggle that out a little bit, because I can end up throwing that into the ultrasonic cleaner as well. Now I'm just going to use a little pair of needle nose pliers here, just the real thin ones, and I'm going to go in here and pinch, and then I'll just twist it out and pull it out just like that. That's what we're left with. It's pretty bent up, but I'm going to put this into the ultrasonic cleaner and try to get this clean. It's got a little dirt and debris built up onto it, so hopefully the ultrasonic cleaner blasts that stuff out. But you guys can see up around here it is pretty dirty, but hopefully when I put everything back together it will work. Okay, so our ultrasonic cleaner has finished cleaning. You guys can see the water now, super cloudy, super cloudy, still hot, steam still coming off it, and there's all sorts of little dirt and debris in there, and they're still going to be floating around, but I'll let this water settle after I pop this thing in there. So again, I'm just going to drop that in there and probably hit it for maybe 5 or 10 minutes. But if you guys can see, before that used to be all rust inside, but now the rust has come free, and I can go in there with a little Scotch-Brite pad and just clean up the rest of that. And as far as all the other components, I'm going to bring this right over to the compressor, and I'm going to use pressurized air to blow out all those little holes. And again, our little brass jet there, I'm going to poke that through with the oxyacetylene tip cleaner and get all of this nice and clean and free of any water and soap. General, guys, just make sure that this is nice and dry. And once again, using my smallest oxyacetylene tip cleaner, I just pop that through just to poke it through and make sure that that jet is clean. I'll do the same thing to the brass piece on the end of that one. And you guys can see that I've got that oxyacetylene tip cleaner here poked through the brass piece at the bottom, just to the point where it starts to pop through. So now I know that that little brass piece there is 100% clean and free of debris. Okay, so to get this put back together, it's pretty straightforward. Just do the opposite of how you took it apart. We're going to take our little brass main jet here, and we're going to screw that in on the top. Then we're going to take our float and our needle valve. We're going to drop it down just like that, and just pop your rod through. Once you have that, you can put your sediment bowl back on. This goes to the back of the machine, so you want to have this out to the front, so if you ever need to drain your sediment bowl, you can do that. Okay, we got that nice and tight, again using just a 10 mil wrench. So now what we're going to do is we're going to test it to make sure that we can blow air through when it's sitting like this, and then when it's upside down, you want to make sure that when you blow into this nozzle, no air comes out of it. See if I can get you guys to hear this. So that's the way it should sound when it's like this, and then when you flip it, it should sound like this. No air going through. So that means that our float is properly seating our needle valve inside of this carburetor. So now what we're going to do is pop this little guy right here back into our carburetor. And again, guys, you want to make sure that you pop that all the way down. Now you guys will know when it's in the proper spot, because you'll see that it's seated all the way down there. And up top of here you have a little piece of the casting on the carburetor, and you just want to have it lined up to there. Okay, now what I didn't do when I was taking this apart was thread that throttle stop in to count how many turns it was, but what I'm going to do is just put it at a baseline, which is right about there. I will adjust this carburetor and that throttle stop once the machine is actually running, because as far as I know, guys, that's the only adjustment that you can do on this carburetor. Again, some models might have a little jet there that you can adjust, but on this model it doesn't have anything there, so that's the only adjustment we can do is up top. Okay, so our ultrasonic cleaner just finished, and we got our little inline fuel filter all cleaned up. Looks a lot cleaner than what it did when we originally took it out. Then I will go and flush the fuel tank, which I haven't done yet, but I definitely want to flush it with just a little bit of fuel to make sure that all the fuel that comes out of here is clean before it gets to this, because I don't want to have to put in a clean fuel filter in here and then have a bunch of dirt and debris clog it up again. So let me go and flush that. I'll pop this in. Same thing, guys, you just stick it in and pop it in all the way until it's it's seated. Okay, so I got our fuel tank all cleaned up and flushed out now. It's all clean of debris. Here's our serial number, model number, spec number. Okay, so we got our tank installed. Again, make sure that you route your fuel lines through those little plastic clips so that you can get that stuff back onto your machine and that it doesn't interfere with the governor as it's moving and whatnot. Okay, so now comes the part where we're going to reinstall our carburetor and our linkage here to our auto choke. Now this guy bolts directly on top of the exhaust, and again you're going to want to put this little stud here towards the carburetor. So you're going to take this end here and you're going to put it into that hole right there, and it should look something like that. You want to have the hook all the way at the bottom, and then we're going to run this and we're going to hook this, that loop there, onto this piece here. Okay, and then basically guys, you're going to take your piece just like this, you're going to slide your carburetor onto the studs, and then you're going to drop this right on top of the muffler. Now what this is, I call it an auto choke system, but the proper terminology for this here is a bimetallic spring. So what a bimetallic strip does is it takes temperature and converts it to mechanical displacement. So as this heats up, this little spring in here will get a little bit of tension on it, and it will pull this lever over that way. It takes your choke from an on position with the butterfly closed so that you're sucking a lot of fuel and not a lot of air. So that'll help you get your machine started. And then once you fire this thing up, again, your exhaust will start to warm up. It'll pull that arm and it'll open your butterfly valve to take your choke off. Other auto choke systems feature a little air diaphragm, and basically that's just a little pump, and it'll run off of something like this over here. So you'll pull your engine and there won't be a lot of crankcase pressure coming out of that line until it starts running, and once it starts running, it'll have a vacuum line similar to this but a little bit smaller. But it'll have a vacuum line coming out of the engine that'll go to the diaphragm, and once that's pressurized, that little diaphragm will expand and again will open up your butterfly valve. In a previous video, I did one explaining the auto choke system that uses the little plastic arm near the flywheel. So basically you'd have your butterfly valve closed as it is now, and when you pull your pull start, it spins the flywheel, and these fins on the flywheel create an air force which pushes out a little plastic lever, which then would open up your butterfly valve. I really like that design because there's not a lot that can go wrong. With this, let's say that little spring in there breaks. So what'll happen now is your engine will be running, but it'll be running on choke all the time because that little spring won't heat up and expand anymore. But that's just a quick explanation of this little auto choke system, and hope you guys learned something. Okay, so we got our 10 mil nuts tightened up on that. What I'm going to do now, guys, is put those caps back on top of those studs just so that I don't forget, and get that on there. Okay, so I've gone ahead and hooked up our spring first. Now I'm just going to take this, pop that in there, and again with a little bit of pressure, pushing down and back on this with your thumb, it just pops in just like that, guys. Okay, so we got our fuel line hooked up now. Don't forget, guys, you want to put your gasket. This one was in great condition, so we don't have to replace it, but make sure you put your gasket back on and make sure that it's in the proper position so that all your holes are free and clear. Okay, and here's a little important piece of information. Remember that our gas tank here vents through that line, right, that little one, and then plugs into the back of this airbox. Well, you want to make sure that that's clean, because there's no point in blowing out your line if the airbox is clogged. So we can see there it is free, and the crankcase vent up here, that one's pretty big, so I can definitely see that there's no stuff in there. It is clear. So what I'm going to do now is pop that back on, get our two 10mm nuts in place. Okay, and once you got your airbox on and your lines plugged in, go ahead and take your velocity stack and just pop that back on just like that. And as far as this air filter goes, it is pretty dirty. Just by spreading out the fins, you can see all kinds of stuff packed in there. So we'll probably end up buying a filter for him. I don't have any of these for the Kohlers in stock because, well, I never normally need them, and I never come across them. And I can't get them cheap on Amazon. Normally the filters we buy for Briggs and Strattons and Hondas and all the other makes, Tecumsehs and whatnot, we get about 10 or 20 in a bag, and we get them for maybe $4 a piece. But even these on Amazon were like $12.99, so we'll probably get them for a little bit cheaper at our local parts store. But for now, I'm just going to take this and blow it out with the compressor just to get the majority of the stuff out of here. So take your air filter, pop it in just like that. These little hooks at the bottom here, hook that in just like that. Push it until it clips. Now we can take our shroud here, complete with the strip stud that Eliminator Performance 100% did not do, just for the record. And we'll just drop this back on top of here. Okay, so we got it on the ground here now, all leveled out. I'm gonna let that sit again to check the oil level properly. But while we're waiting for the oil level to settle out, I'm gonna take the spark plug boot off, remove the spark plug, and check to make sure if it's the right spark plug, and second is to check the gap. And the size of socket that you're gonna need is a 5/8 to remove that spark plug. And I kid you not, guys, that's a brand new spark plug. I remember my customer saying that he replaced the spark plug thinking that that was the problem. A DCPR6E is the proper plug. So if you guys want to check for yourselves to see whether or not you have the proper spark plug in an engine that, let's say, is on a lawnmower that you bought, you want to get your model number, serial number. So in this case, it's on a sticker on the back of the fuel tank. On Briggs and Strattons, you'll have a little metal tab that'll be over here by the shroud, and you take that, and normally I type that information into ereplacementparts.com, and normally as soon as I type in the model number, they have a full parts list that comes up. You go to spark plug, you copy the number, you go to Google, you paste that number in, and it'll come up with a reference chart telling you that, you know, like an RJ19LM can be cross-referenced with an NGK this and that, or an AC Delco, or a Denso, whatever. So in this case, it's supposed to take 1413211-S1 spark plug. So again, like I said, just going into Google here, I typed in that number, and right here you see cross-reference. You click on that, it'll load up a page, and it'll tell you that it should be NGK DCPR6E, and that's the exact plug that we have right here, guys. A DCPR6E. So that's the right plug. Okay, so I drained a little bit of oil out of the engine there, and this thing's ready to fire up. I got about, I'd say 3/4 of a liter of fresh premium gas in there, and I'm gonna take it outside. It's a good thing we came in here though, because it's starting to rain now. Crazy Port Colborne weather. Well, I've had this thing running for about 5 minutes now, and it hasn't shut off on its own, and I think that's it, problem solved. So little chunk of rust inside of the main jet, and you know, it probably got bounced around while he was cutting grass, and then every once in a while it would get right into the main jet and clog it up, and it would just die of fuel starvation. So it couldn't get any more fuel, and it would just stop running. Well, guys, it appears all this machine needed was just a little carb clean, and believe it or not, our customer actually brought this machine to a local shop here that I won't say the name of, but he dropped it off, and they fired it up, and I guess they ran it, and they said, there's nothing wrong with it, you can come and pick it up. And he was kind of left, you know, shaking his head saying, well, obviously there's something wrong with it. And I mean, clearly there's something wrong with the machine if a customer shows up at your shop with their lawnmower, right? I mean, this guy didn't take time out of his day to load the lawnmower into his truck to drop it off at the shop because there was nothing wrong with it. So this deal works out pretty good. Our customer's happy. It makes Eliminator Performance look really good because another shop turned it down saying there was nothing wrong with it. But I mean, you guys heard it run, and I'll put a clip in here now so that you can hear it again. How it was sputtering, and which to me generally tells you that there's something in the carb, a piece of gunk built up in the main jet, and sure enough there was. You guys saw that little chunk of rust in there, but other than that, guys, it was just a quick carb clean. The oil doesn't need changing. Again, there was a little bit too much, so I had to drain some out, but the oil looks pretty good. So what we'll do is we'll recommend that he drops his machine off at Eliminator Performance next year. We'll do a blade sharpen, deck undercoat with rust check, and you know, we can change the oil and make sure that the machine's running good, and we'll probably put an air filter on it as well, and he's got a new spark plug, so it shouldn't need that. My buddy just came to pick up his lawnmower, and I think his bill come out to like 90 bucks. I think I charged him an hour labor, which is 60 bucks. We charge 60 bucks an hour, and like $20 for an ultrasonic carb clean. So it came out to like 80 bucks plus tax. HST and here in Canada is 13%, so it was like $90.40. I think we charged him 90 bucks even, and he was happy. But here's the thing that I didn't know. When he took it to the local shop here and they looked at it, they charged him $75 just to look at it, and they turned around and said that there was nothing wrong with it, that they looked at it, that they started it up and it ran fine, and they said, oh, there's nothing wrong with it, you owe us $75. So not only did he not get his mower fixed, but he also got charged 75 bucks for them doing nothing. Now, I charge people for a diagnosing fee, but I only charge them if, you know, the machine needs work. Let's say you bring me a lawnmower and it needs a carb clean. So I look at it, maybe it takes me 10 minutes to look at it, and I say, listen, it's going to be about $90 to fix. Let's say, you know, the same amount of money that he just paid. And I said, this machine needs a carb clean and it needs this and that, and it's going to be about 90 bucks. And somebody says, no, sorry, I'll take it someplace else. Then I would charge them for the time that it took me to look at it, because the machine needs work, but it's not fixed, but there's still something wrong with it. Now, if somebody brings me a machine that literally needs nothing and I fire it up and it runs fine, why would I charge them for a machine that doesn't need anything, right? Even if I took the time to look at it, if it doesn't need anything, you shouldn't be charging them anything. So that kind of pissed me off. I wasn't aware that this local business was doing these business practices and running their business like that, but that's definitely not the way to do things, guys. I mean, really, who does that, guys? Like, who does that? Not Eliminator Performance. All in all, guys, if you enjoyed the video, leave me a like. Think about subscribing. You can click here to subscribe, and click over here for one of my previous videos that I did. And as always, guys, thanks for watching.